Well, thank you for joining us again for our latest episode. In this episode, we're going to talk about disciplinary, still following the life cycle of the employee. So we've already talked through, recruiting them, onboarding them, managing their performance. And now let's assume that there is something that has caused us to not think that their performance is good. And so it's caused us to take them down a route of disciplinary. So as always, I'm sure Sarah's got some horror stories. I think I say that every episode because there are so many. But there are also some companies that do it really well as well. So maybe you can tell us a bit about what that would look like if it was done well, and then we can touch on the other ones afterwards.
Yeah. So I think the disciplinary, as yes, we're talking about the employee life cycle, and I guess the disciplinary is a bit of like a side road. A disciplinary is
not necessarily something we want.
No, it's not necessarily something we want at all, but it is a useful tool. And when disciplinaries are done right, the aim ought to be to correct somebody's behaviour. Okay. And I say behaviour, but to improve somebody's performance, correct somebody's behaviour, change somebody's attitude, to formally inform them that something is not acceptable and that they've repeatedly done something wrong. Mm-hmm. If you think about it as being, and I often say this when I've done disciplinaries with individuals as an HR leader in a business, that, I'm like your mum sending you to bed with no dinner. It's that kind of corrective behaviour. It's not the end of the world. You're not going to die because you've got a disciplinary letter on your file or anything like this. It is a document that is only kept within the business. It's not shared with anyone. And the only time where it can really impact on your future is if you are terminated for gross misconduct, which would be under Article 44 here. And even then, only if a future employer asks for a reference and asks why you were terminated. Okay? So it's not the end of the world, is the first thing.
Okay.
And it feels like it when you get the letter. And I put my hand up. In my career, I have had disciplinary letters.
Ooh.
I know.
You naughty girl.
I know. But I've accepted them with the good grace that they are. I did something wrong and I was corrected. It's not a problem.
We need to talk about that off air. I don't know this story.
It was nothing desperate or dangerous.
Okay, but times then potentially when disciplinaries are given and maybe they're not justified.
Absolutely. No, definitely. And look, depending on the strength of the disciplinary procedure that's in place within a business. And if you listened back to our previous episodes, you would have heard me talk about my interpretation of a sliding scale of where, in terms of HR maturity, various companies are on that scale. And it's not saying that there's one that's better or right or wrong. It's just a physicality. There are some companies that are still very transactional in this process and will have a line manager ring the HR department and say, give this person a disciplinary warning letter because they've done 1, 2, 3 wrong, and that is it. That person then gets a letter saying you've got disciplinary, and that's on their record. I don't accept such phone calls. Those that have worked with me will know that, because that's not conducive. But I do recognise that there are certain situations and companies where that is, it fits with the culture of the business and the structure of the business. Mm-hmm. On the other end of the scale, you've got what really good looks like. And for me, that is leaning more towards a US European structure of holding disciplinaries. And it can be a little bit overwhelming in terms of actually going through the process. But it's there for a reason. Mm-hmm. You need to have a process that fits with your team as well, with your situation and company and structure. Not everybody has the capacity for 15 different individuals at my management level that can all act independently in various different disciplinary processes to keep something as transparent and unbiased as possible, let's say, okay? You may only have 3 or 4 managers, but you need to make sure and understand how they can interplay so that the same person's disciplinary is not heard and not judged by the same manager, and therefore a bias isn't introduced and things like this.
Yeah.
But before we get into all of that, I'm going to go back a couple of steps. So, and I'm going to do my legal bit. Sorry. I don't know why I'm apologising, but hey. Under the new labour law, Article 39 is the disciplinary sanctions and disciplinary actions, what can be done by an employer. Article 44 is termination without notice, and there are specific situations and circumstances under which termination can be done without notice, and that is technically referred to as a gross misconduct clause. One of those is non-performance. One of those is causing damage or causing massive losses, risk to the business, so financial loss. Mm-hmm. And one of those is around health and safety in the workplace and not following rules and regulations, okay? And those, I mentioned those 3 because they're usually the ones that companies are disciplining, like the kind of categories or classifications of disciplinary that companies are putting their employees under. So not following the rules and not doing their job, right? You can't terminate somebody immediately for not doing their job. Mm-hmm. You can give them, and you need to give them 2 written warnings before you can terminate someone. So that's where that leads into Article 39 from Article 44, okay? On top of Article 39, we have Article 24, the executive resolution that supports the labour law. And there is specific details in there about how the process must be done. So the individual must be, who is, and I will use the word accused, but it's not in a legal sense, but the person who is in question must be informed of what it is that they're being disciplined about or what the issue is. They must be given any evidence and details of evidence. There must be an investigation held, and there must be a meeting to discuss the investigation, the evidence. The individual must be given the chance to explain in their own words or present their own evidence as to what happened, to countermand whatever is there from the employer, so almost. And the decision that's taken must be documented with evidence in writing to the individual. One point that's missed by a lot of people is that the employee has the right to appeal against that decision, and it is in Article 24. Mm-hmm. So there must be a route of appeal that if the employee says, I still don't think you've listened to me, I still don't think that decision is fair, there must be a place where he can write to someone else in the business and say, I disagree, and have that case reopened, revisited, and looked at to say, yes, I agree. On the understanding that the existing decision may be upheld, it may be downgraded, it may be upgraded, depending on who revisits it. But they must have that right of appeal, and that is overlooked by a lot. The investigation element is overlooked a lot as well. You look like you're going to jump in with something.
I was just going to say, please. I think in terms of, HR is responsible for making sure the employee knows that they have the right to challenge it. But I wonder, in some instances, whether an employee would actually feel like they would want to say something. Again, back to the culture piece of, if I challenge this, will it be to the detriment of me? Because they're not used to being able to kind of stand up for themselves, because they're very much used to the idea that they kind of do what the senior people have told them to do. And so in a situation like this, even when they're kind of given that opportunity to challenge this, whether they would actually feel the freedom to do that.
Yeah, and this is something that I am always really conscious of when I've been doing disciplinaries in a corporate setting in the past. Yeah. And it's something that no HR person enjoys doing disciplinaries. No. Ever. But you can do a disciplinary with a heart. And that's important, is to remember the human that you're dealing with, remember the people you're dealing with. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I do is, for the individual, where you've got a scenario that something happened, I will ask the individual concerned to give essentially a statement of account of what actually happened. So on this day, I did this, I came here at this, and or whatever the scenario is. And I encourage them to write the names and give me any information about who else is involved. Okay? Like, did somebody see this happen? And I will talk to them about it. So when they submit that to me, I will read it through and I will ask them, did anybody see this happen? Was anybody standing nearby? Did anybody overhear it from the team?
Yeah.
Right? For them to have the opportunity to tell me. And if they do tell me, then I will go to that party and ask them and say, look, this is the situation we're in. This is confidential. Would you be willing to say anything in his defense?
Yeah.
Did you overhear this?
Yeah.
Okay. To encourage and to get that almost external input. So it's not the individual asking, it's HR asking, which has a bit of authority behind it, and I respect that. But to allow them, and even if they say yes, but I'm not prepared to put it on paper, okay, that's fine. And I respect that of individuals, but I can then take that back to say, I've spoken to this person and they've said, yes, they saw so-and-so do this, or they saw that happen. They're not willing to put it on paper, but we need to consider that information to give that support to being able to say, yes, it's right, or no, it's not.
Yeah, and I think HR also have an obligation to kind of support the employee. I mean, as much as they're responsible for, being a good representation of the organisation, they're also responsible for making sure the employee's looked after as well.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the middleman, if you like. And for me, their job is to make sure that the process is followed accordingly in terms of what's legal, but also thinking about the employee as a person. I always think, if this was my mother, brother, how would I want them to be treated? I would want them to have a fair scenario being played out, and so I'll do what I can to kind of support them, making sure they at least know what their rights are, and make sure that their voice is heard, even if maybe it feels out of character for them to kind of speak up.
Yeah, and it's important because when you have that, when you have it's all very well having a process on paper, and if you don't follow that process, or if that process isn't structured and transparent, isn't supportive, then it's not actually worth very much. And you lose confidence, you lose trust, you lose respect within your team, not just with HR, but with the management team as a whole, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because there becomes a divide between the employees and the management, because they think, oh, well, we'll just get sacked if we do something wrong, or we'll just get given a disciplinary letter, and there's no discussion, and there's no fairness, and there's no equality. So it's about having a process that supports every individual, sees both sides of the story, is fair and equitable and transparent, regardless of who. Doesn't matter if you're having this process for someone who is a general manager or a office boy, or top salesperson of the year. It doesn't matter. The process still needs to be the same. The structure of the process needs to be the same, and the outcome needs to be decided upon based on the situation for that individual. But the decision making for that process should be the same. So it shouldn't matter, well, he's a GM, and this is that. He's a GM, so we'll just let him get away with it because it's whatever. That's not right. If it is something that is wrong, then it is wrong.
So years ago, an employee may have potentially gone to a union rep, for example, to get support or advice. Most companies these days don't have unions. I know a lot of companies
are not legal over here.
Okay.
So even that.
But I know that a lot of companies utilize like employee forum groups and stuff. Is this something that HR could make use of? A forum group for employees to be able to go to, or is that again not something that would be like legally possible?
One of the difficulties over here is that groups such as unions and that type of sort of gathering or collective of individuals is not supported under law.
Yeah.
And that makes it quite difficult for groups to set up to be kind of against something, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And I know that's not the intention, but that's often, that's what we hear about unions from the UK, people going on strike because recently with the nurses union in the UK and the doctors going on strike because they disagree with the pay rise they're being given. So there's very negative connotations to the most of the time. And that's one of the reasons that they don't want them here, I believe. What I would say is that, having open conversations with individuals, having the opportunity for people to express their opinions, express their feelings, having regular gatherings and conversations with team members at all levels without management there, without even the HR manager there. It could be an HR executive or an HR administrator that is hosting the meeting. So it's on par with the same grading structure within the team, for example, where they can speak freely. And it sounds archaic, but having an anonymous comments box so people can put that in there and that allows someone to say, this is going on and I disagree with it. And, look, this is something that will, and I'm adding to our list of topics, but, that's a very sort of low-level whistleblowing policy. But that type of thing and allowing and having the forum for people to say this is going on and it's not right, will help build and acting upon what's written there. If you just ignore it and throw it away, it's a waste of time. But acting upon what's written there will help develop that trust and respect. And developing trust and respect around a disciplinary process is actually quite easy. And I say that from experience, having worked in companies where people who have been there previous to me have maybe not had the same attitude and approach that I have. And I've been weirdly complimented by individuals who have been disciplined by me, who have been told and gone through it, you've got a final written warning. And they've gone, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And thank you for being nice about it. And we understand and we accept it, That for me makes, I'm doing my job right. If that's what I get, if that's what the outcome is, not that the person's got a written warning, but that they feel comfortable, relaxed, accepting, that the process has been followed, that it's been rationalised, if you see what I mean. There are always going to be those people that don't do that, and people who will go off the deep end in disciplinary meetings and what have you. And I've been through everything, to be honest, from a disciplinary that was tagged for a 20-minute conversation, turning up at 3.5 hours, going through the gambit of emotions with the individual, through to having an individual threaten one of my team with a hitman because we were terminating his employment because he didn't perform properly. It's great fun.
I was going to say, in some cases, though, there might be a disciplinary situation occurring because, there was something that was expected of the employee. But maybe the employee hasn't understood that was expected or that it was such a big deal. We were talking beforehand, I think, something as simple as timekeeping, because cross-culturally different people value time in different ways.
Absolutely.
Some see it as a commodity and therefore tend to be punctual, but others see that time can be flexible and fluid and it doesn't need to be so structured. So, if their arrival time at work is a set time, they might be arriving at 5 past the hour and not really seeing that there's a big deal with that. But that might then lead to somebody being told several times over, this needs to be improved. And then it gets to disciplinary. And, maybe we've not, maybe as an organisation, we haven't understood, first of all, how different cultural dynamics can even impact something as small as, timekeeping and the way that people see time. And then secondly, and on that basis, then have we set the parameters of what good looks like in our organisation. You know, there's certain roles that would require you to be there like on time for your shift. And there'd be others where maybe we could actually allow a level of flexibility as long as the job was done. But those conversations need to have happened, you know, first of all at SLT level to determine what does the organisation want to drive in terms of the way that we expect our employees to behave. And then that then is communicated effectively down through the ranks, so that everybody knows. But but something as simple as that could have been what caused this person to get a disciplinary. And now that person's in this situation where they're, you know, going to have a black mark against their name, if you like, that they don't necessarily feel they're due to get. And again, may not challenge because they don't feel it's appropriate to challenge.
Do you know, and I'm going to say another light bulb moment for me, but it's joining the dots, is that, you know, when I learnt about what the UK requirements for a disciplinary process were many moons ago when I was working back there in corporate there, one of the conversations that you would have with an individual is, let's take the example of being late, is why are you late?
Yeah.
Okay. Did the train get stuck? If you're coming to work by tube in central London, for example, did the metro get stuck in Dubai? Did your alarm clock have enough batteries in it? Okay, is your phone switched on? Is it on at the right time? Is it on silent? Did you snooze it? And understand, you know, do you know that you're supposed to be? So you're removing all of the mitigating factors as to why that person might be late, but never on that realm of discussion are we sat there going, maybe culturally you just don't get it, you know. And now I'm sat here going, I never asked that. And the number of people where I've gone, okay, did you have batteries in your phone, you know, and they've actually gone, yeah, it's fine. And they've been really dismissive of everything that's been presented, and almost to the point of brushing off the disciplinary that they're being given and the situation that you're in. And I'm sat there going, you do realise that this is your second out of 3 strikes. You know, if you do this again, and they're like, yeah, whatever. And that me joining the dots today now and going, and probably that person is that kind of person, cultural understanding.
So people that value time in a more fluid way are polychronic.
Thank you. That's a technical term.
You're monochronic, Sarah. So that would be why you'd see that. But I think also
I think I've been swaying more to polychronic since I've been living over here, I must admit.
But I think also sometimes in terms of that being the example, timekeeping, I think the manager may have an entirely different living circumstances in some cases to some of the frontline employees that they might be managing. You know, I think people, especially if you've come from your overseas and now you're managing a team of people here, and this goes back to that, you might be technically good at your job in your own country, but maybe not so good here. You know, if you've not been exposed to the idea that some of your team might be sharing accommodation, which means we're sharing a bathroom, you know, what happens if your mate took an extra 10 minutes in the bathroom, you know, that then delays you. You know, the guy still wants to come to work having had a shower. He's then ended up getting, you know, on the metro late or missing his bus pickup.
Yeah, because there's all these guys that do the bus sharing trips and everything, and it's not like there's another one in 5 minutes. That's the one for the morning. And
there's that one, and then that's it. And if you've missed it, then you're done for the day. So there's all of those things that I think sometimes, you know, when you get to a certain level in an organisation, and perhaps you have come in from overseas, that you're not necessarily taking into consideration, because maybe you've just got up, grab your coffee, and you've got in your own car, and you can't understand why nobody else can do what you're able to do. But actually, it's because you're not facing the same challenges as some of the other people in your organisation. So again, when we come to disciplinary, I suppose we also have to have also err on the sense of grace in terms of, you know, can I be a bit more gracious towards my employees in terms of the day-to-day challenges just that they face to get here sometimes. And so maybe timekeeping is something that I have to be a bit more flexible with. But we can have a good, sensible conversation about that before we maybe have to get to a point of disciplinary.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it's always, I always say to myself, as well as anyone else that I'm working with for disciplinaries and doing investigations, be as objective as you possibly can be. Put yourself in that person's shoes and try and understand why they might have done what they've done. There are very few people that do things wrong on purpose.
Yeah.
Right.
I always say this: people don't get up to work to get up in the morning to do a job and just do it really badly.
No,
every time I say that, people go, "Oh, I don't know." There are a few people.
There's always a few
but
people.
I don't think people wake up to be a grump. They don't wake up to be difficult as they can be. They don't wake up to do a really poor job at work.
No. And they don't wake up to make mistakes. They don't do it on purpose. And sometimes situations force people to make a decision that in hindsight, actually, that's not the right thing to have done. Situations sometimes force people to make decisions that are technically wrong, or because you're having to pacify a customer, so it goes against, completely goes against the grain of everything, and you just need to accept that that's what it is. Should you punish an individual for it? I think you've got to look at the circumstances, and you do need to be mindful, and when you're being judge and jury, that you're not putting your own perceptions onto it. You've got to look at the evidence in front of you and be very critical and objective over it, to be black and white. And it's difficult in such a scenario as this to go through the different connotations of all the different situations that there could be, because there's so many different ones. But just be human. Just think about the individual concerned. Think about the situation. What would you do? How would you feel? Look at the evidence in question and then make the best decision. But give the opportunity to the individual to speak as well, and do your best to make sure that they can feel heard and are allowed to be heard. And remember, they can appeal. And I think, we can talk about this an awful lot longer. We can. And I could go into many, many stories, but we won't. And maybe after a coffee or two, I'll tell you about my disciplinary history. But until next time, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for joining, Emma. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And again, more join the dots and light bulb moments for me. So on to the next one. Again, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to drop us a line. Again, contact us through LinkedIn, either through the podcast page on LinkedIn or either of our LinkedIn profiles or on the YouTube channel. And we look forward to hearing you. Equally, we would like to know your suggestions for topics that you would like to be discussed. Please let us know what you'd like us to be talking about. And until next time, thank you very much.